There's a strange quiet before life changes, not loud, not dramatic, but soft, like a breath held between two heartbeats. Have you felt it? A subtle unraveling, where the things that used to feel like home begin to lose their warmth, and the dreams you once chased no longer stir your pulse. It's not failure, it's resonance shifting. You haven't gone backward. You've simply stopped vibrating at the level of your old life. So take a breath with me. Are you in your bed? A quiet room? Somewhere between sleep and waking? Wherever you are, you've arrived at a portal disguised as a pause. Tonight, I'll guide you into the space where quantum change begins, not by doing more, but by being differently. This is a story not about effort, but about alignment, about how your emotional frequency reshapes the world around you, softly, steadily, invisibly. Subscribe so we can keep exploring this path together. Settle in. Something deeper than thoughts is ready to speak, and your presence is the invitation it's been waiting for. There's a moment, and it doesn't announce itself, where your world begins to stretch in a way you can't yet measure. It doesn't look like a shift. It feels like a strange quietness, like the taste of your favorite food becoming slightly muted, like laughter that no longer echoes the same way in your chest. You're not sad. Not exactly. But something is loosening, like a grip you didn't realize you'd been holding. Conversations become harder to finish. The music you used to turn up now feels like noise. It's not depression. It's not confusion. It's a frequency that is beginning to mismatch the one you used to live in. Like a radio station slowly going static, your reality is between broadcasts. The old is fading, and the new hasn't come into tune. And you, the receiver, are floating in the in-between, holding the hum of two worlds at once. This strange place is sacred, but most people miss it. Because in our world, we've been taught to measure movement by what we can explain. We like progress that has metrics, growth that leaves footprints. But what if the most profound transformations happen quietly, invisibly, like a violin string slowly tightening in silence until it's ready to sing? In quantum mechanics, there's a concept called superposition, the idea that a particle can exist in multiple potential states at once until observed. It's not that the particle is indecisive. It's that it hasn't yet chosen which version of reality to collapse into. And in moments like these, that's you, suspended, holding several futures in your field. Not wrong, not late, just unmeasured, untangled. Becoming dot, this is the moment before reality rearranges. And if it feels like waiting, that's only because your nervous system is addicted to urgency. Most of your life, urgency has been a substitute for meaning. The faster it came, the more important it must have been. But this slowness, this delay, this wide and awkward pause, it's not lack, it's preparation. Your system is learning how to stabilize a new pattern without collapsing into the old. You're not regressing, you're softening. Because the new can't enter a clenched field. It needs breath, space, surrender. Like soil before the seed, your being is loosening to make room. Have you noticed how things are thinning out? Not falling apart, just drifting. A friend who used to text daily now fades into silence. A goal that once consumed you now feels like chasing shadows. Even your inner voice, the one that used to narrate every problem like a sports commentator, has gone quiet. This isn't emptiness, it's recalibration. In physics, when a wave loses coherence with its environment, it doesn't disappear. It collapses, only to reform into a new pattern. That's you. The structure of your emotional landscape is reweaving. The story you used to tell about yourself, the one shaped by old fears and past expectations, is no longer a match for what you're becoming. And this is where it gets confusing. Because the human mind is designed to predict, not pause. Your brain doesn't like untethered states. It would rather latch on to pain than float in peace. Familiar suffering feels safer than unfamiliar ease. So in this pause, your mind will invent stories. Something's wrong. You're falling behind. You should be doing more. But none of that is true. What's true is that you are in between identities. The old self isn't broken. It's just dissolving. Like scaffolding around a cathedral that's already been completed. It's no longer needed, and so it falls away. Sometimes it's not what arrives that changes your life. It's what leaves. The urge to prove yourself. The hunger for validation. The fear that rest equals laziness. The reflex to say yes just to avoid disappointing others. These aren't personality traits. They're survival patterns. Echoes from a timeline where love had to be earned. But now, you're not in that timeline anymore. Your frequency is shedding what no longer resonates. And yes, it can feel disorienting. Because when your identity shifts, your perception shifts too. People you once admired might now feel misaligned. Goals that defined your ambition might now seem hollow. The version of you that created those connections was operating on a different signal. That's not betrayal. It's evolution. Here's where the quiet work begins. Not the doing, but the undoing. Not the building, but the allowing. This isn't the time for grand gestures or 10-step plans. It's the time for noticing. Where do you tense unnecessarily? What are you pretending still fits? What small choice made differently today could shift your entire internal trajectory? When you stop operating on autopilot, everything becomes a sacred experiment. You don't need to force a leap. You just need to respond differently. A sigh instead of a snap. A pause instead of a push. A smile that doesn't need to be returned. These micro-shifts are not trivial. They are the scaffolding of a new self. Many people think spiritual growth feels like light, but often it feels like loss. Loss of drive. Loss of identity. Loss of belonging. The old systems, external and internal, begin to crumble, and what's left is a soft, unwritten space. This is what quantum physicist David Bohm called the implicate order, a hidden layer of reality from which all form arises. You're in that space now, the formless before the form. And while your ego might panic, your soul exhales. Because this is the part of the journey where you stop chasing alignment and start becoming it. And just when you think nothing is happening, something begins. It's subtle. A moment of peace that lasts longer than usual. A song that hits you in a way it never did before. An insight that feels like remembering rather than learning. These are signals from the new timeline, tiny pulses from the version of you that already lives there, whispering back through the veil. Keep going. You're getting close. You don't need to know the whole map. You just need to trust the breadcrumb that shows up today. Your nervous system might not celebrate this. It's wired for efficiency, not mystery. It wants closure, certainty, outcomes. But your soul thrives in openness, in potential, in the liminal. So the invitation now is to stay in the space between, to honor the not yet, to feel the discomfort and not label it as wrong. Because the ache isn't a sign of failure. It's the sound of your future stretching through you. And what's coming isn't just a better version of your past. It's a frequency you've never stabilized before. One that doesn't rely on struggle for significance. One that doesn't require collapse to deserve rest. One where ease is not a reward, but a default. But in order to receive that, you must become resonant with it. That's why things are falling away, not as punishment, but as preparation. Not because you're broken, but because you're too whole to pretend anymore. The quantum leap isn't dramatic. It's delicate. It arrives like a change in wind, invisible but undeniable. You may not recognize the shift at first, because it doesn't scream. It settles. It lands quietly. And when it does, you'll find yourself reacting to life differently. Not because you read more, healed more, pushed more, but because you vibrated differently. And reality, being the mirror that it is, had no choice but to match you. You might be tempted to think this space, this pause, is a test. As if the universe is watching with folded arms, waiting to see if you'll crack under the pressure of stillness. But what if it's not a test at all? What if it's a recalibration chamber? A sacred compression of time where the noise is silenced just long enough for you to hear your own frequency without interference? Most people don't recognize it when it arrives. They think they're failing, that something's wrong. But what they're really experiencing is the soft fade out of an outdated identity and the silent arrival of the one they've already grown into. This kind of transformation isn't loud. It doesn't happen in conferences or breakthroughs or viral moments. It happens in the ordinary, in the split second when you choose presence instead of panic, when you pause before reacting, when you say no with love, not guilt, when you stop explaining your boundaries and start honoring them quietly. These moments don't look spiritual on the outside, but inside, they're seismic. Every aligned response shifts your internal geometry. Every time you resist collapsing into the old pattern, you're anchoring a new vibration. Not with effort, with awareness. And yet, even as you grow, discomfort may still arise, sometimes sharper than before. Why? Because the contrast between your current energy and the fading echoes of your old life becomes more pronounced. What used to feel like minor friction now feels like unbearable static. You're not more sensitive, you're more precise. You've become a finely tuned instrument, and your body notices even the smallest dissonance. That tightness in your chest around certain people, that fatigue after a conversation that used to feel neutral, those aren't coincidences, they're information. Resonance is becoming your compass, and you're finally learning how to listen. There's a common belief that awakening makes you immune to suffering, that once you're spiritual enough, nothing rattles you. But real awakening is the opposite. It makes you feel more, not less. You cry without needing a reason. You feel joy so raw it almost hurts. You become aware of pain in others before they speak it. This sensitivity isn't weakness. It's signal amplification. You're no longer numbed by old coping mechanisms, so everything arrives unfiltered. This isn't emotional chaos. It's frequency clarity. And while it might feel overwhelming at times, it's also the very power that will carry you into coherence. You've likely noticed your dreams changing. Not just the ones at night, but the ones you used to plan for. The job titles, the achievements, the specific ways you wanted to be seen. They don't hold the same magnetic pull. That's not because you've lost ambition. It's because the source of your drive has shifted from external to internal. You're no longer chasing safety through status. You're sourcing it from stillness. That's a monumental leap in frequency, and the world around you hasn't caught up yet. So of course, there's dissonance. Your outer life is rearranging to match your inner resonance. That takes time. Don't confuse the lag with failure. It's in this gap between old momentum and new embodiment where people tend to sabotage themselves. They grasp, they hustle, they force, not because they're wrong, but because they're afraid of what stillness might reveal. But nothing is more magnetic than coherence. The more you return to yourself, your breath, your body, your clarity, the more the field reconfigures to reflect that signal. This is not magical thinking, it's physics. Coherent systems influence incoherent ones. The universe doesn't respond to begging. It responds to stability, to rhythm, to presence. And the strange thing, the more aligned you become, the weirder life feels, at least at first. Synchronicities become uncanny. You'll think of someone and they'll message. you'll feel the urge to walk a different way home and stumble upon the very thing you didn't know you needed. Time bends, conversations deepen, but also things fall apart. Systems that once protected you, your avoidance, your sarcasm, your productivity addiction, stop working. They feel brittle, exhausting. That's not regression. That's release. Your nervous system is retiring the armor it no longer needs. You might find yourself grieving things that never happened, versions of life you thought you'd live, paths you were once sure would fulfill you. That grief is holy. It's the heart-stretching to make room for a different future, one not built on control, but on coherence, not on plans, but on presence. And that grief? It doesn't mean you were wrong. It means you're free. Let's talk about the people around you. Some will drift. Others will resist your change, not out of malice, but because your evolution threatens their certainty. They knew how to relate to the old you, the one who over-explained, who self-abandoned, who laughed at things that hurt just to keep the peace. But now, you're quieter, clearer, less interested in performance. That kind of presence is unsettling to those still performing, so they might withdraw, they might mock, or worse, they might try to pull you back, not because they're enemies, but because your stillness reminds them of the noise they haven't faced yet. Bless them. Release them. Let resonance do the sorting. There will be days when it feels like nothing is happening, when the shift you're living feels invisible. That's the paradox. The deeper the transformation, the less external evidence it leaves at first. You might feel like you're moving through fog, but fog isn't failure. It's transition. Clarity doesn't come from speed. It comes from alignment. And alignment isn't a mindset. It's a frequency, a felt sense of yes in your body, even if your mind hasn't caught up yet. This is where most give up, right before the rearrangement becomes visible. They mistake silence for stagnation. But silence is sacred. Space, it's the quantum field waiting for your consistency before it reflects your shift. So breathe here, stay here, even when it's boring. Especially then. Boredom is what the nervous system feels right before it lets go of adrenaline addiction. Before it learns that peace is safe. That joy can be quiet. That purpose doesn't. Have to scream to be real. And then something subtle starts to happen. You stop reacting. Not because you've shut down, but because you no longer confuse urgency with importance. You stop over-explaining. Not because you don't care, but because you no longer need to be understood to feel valid. You stop performing healing. You just are. Your presence alone transmits stability. And in a world addicted to reaction, that calm is revolutionary. This doesn't mean life stops challenging you, but your relationship to challenge transforms. The storm might still come, but you no longer mistake the wind for a verdict. You no longer collapse into old meaning structures. You hold the line. You become the rhythm, the coherence. And in doing so, you become the tuning fork that reshapes the room, not by fixing others, but by staying tuned yourself. You're not here to hustle the universe. You're here to harmonize with it, to remember that every desire is not just a signal you send out, but an invitation to become the version of you that can receive it without fragmentation. That's the real work, not chasing outcomes, but becoming the pattern that naturally attracts them. That's not delusion. That's energetic physics. So when things get quiet, stay. When the dream feels distant, soften. When the mind spirals, breathe. These aren't passive acts. They're the most powerful form of participation in a quantum reality, because the field isn't waiting for your hustle. It's waiting for your harmonic, your clarity, your unshakable signal. At some point in this unfolding, and it's rarely marked by a calendar or ceremony. Something shifts so quietly you almost miss it. You wake up one morning, and the ache that used to greet you like an old friend doesn't show up. You look at a message that once would have unraveled you, and you feel nothing. Not apathy, not numbness, just spaciousness, like the charge has evaporated, like the hook has unlatched. This is the moment after the shift, and it doesn't come with fireworks or epiphanies. It comes like peace, unremarkable, gentle, whole. Integration doesn't knock. It walks in like it's always lived there. And you realize the leap already happened. Not in some dramatic climax, but in the dozens of small moments where you chose presence over panic, stillness over scrambling, where you whispered no to your old story, not because it was wrong, but because it was finished. And this is the paradox. Quantum change often arrives looking like nothing at all, because it doesn't shout, "I'm here." It simply stops hurting, stops pushing, stops requiring explanation. You don't become someone else. You just stop pretending you ever were. Your body starts to respond differently too. You eat when you're hungry, not when you're anxious. You rest without justifying it. You walk slower, breathe deeper. You begin to trust your own pacing, no longer sprinting because others are running. That's coherence. A nervous system that no longer sees rest as a threat, that no longer needs to broadcast distress signals to feel valid. And when your biology relaxes, the field around you recalibrates. Reality doesn't chase force. It blooms. Around safety. You start to notice the miracles you used to overlook. A stranger's smile that lingers. A bird landing precisely in your path. A song on the radio that feels like a message meant only for you. These are not accidents. They're harmonics. When you stabilize your frequency, the world becomes an orchestra again, and everything plays in key. You don't need to interpret every sign. You simply feel the alignment. It hums through your skin, not your thoughts. And here's what most people never expect. You don't need to chase your purpose. It finds you. When you stop broadcasting confusion, your path gets clearer. Not because some cosmic riddle gets solved, but because you've become still enough to hear what was always whispering. The path doesn't scream. It listens for your silence. And when it hears you, it moves. Relationships shift too. Some fall away without drama. Others return with new resonance. And new connections arise. Not because you manifested them like checkboxes on a vision board, but because they match your field now. There's no more trying to be chosen. You become the chooser, not out of ego, but out of clarity. You no longer say yes to half connections. Not because they're bad, but because you're whole. And wholeness doesn't negotiate its worth. Of course, life still happens. Bills still need paying. Grief still visits. But your relationship to it all transforms. You no longer collapse under the weight of the unexpected. You absorb it, transmute it, move with it. This is the quiet alchemy of coherence. It doesn't mean your life becomes perfect. It means it becomes yours, truly yours, not inherited from survival, not borrowed from culture, not performed for belonging, authored by you, line by line, breath by breath. And then comes the deep remembering, the one that unravels centuries of forgetting, that you are the signal, the source. The field isn't judging your worth. It's reflecting your broadcast. And when you stop asking, am I doing enough? And start asking, am I being honest with my frequency? Everything softens, because the field doesn't need your hustle. It needs your truth, your clarity, your quiet yes to what already lives inside you. You may revisit old places, old friends, old situations, and feel like a guest in a life that used to be yours. That's not regression. That's resonance showing you what's no longer yours to carry. You don't need to burn bridges. You just stop walking on them. Not from bitterness, from balance. There's no need to explain your shift. Your vibration says it all, and those meant to walk with you won't need convincing. They'll recognize the frequency. They'll remember your language. And together, you'll build a new story. Not out of wounds, but out of wisdom, God. And then there's the final layer, the subtle, sacred one. The moment when you realize you're not performing your healing anymore. You're living it. Not talking about boundaries, but embodying them. Not chasing synchronicity, but resting inside it. Not manifesting outcomes, but becoming the kind of presence that outcomes gravitate toward. This is where reality stops feeling like a puzzle and starts feeling like a song. Not one you sing, one you are. This doesn't mean you're done growing, but you've shifted the foundation. You're no longer growing to prove something. You're growing because life moves that way. Because expansion is your nature. Because curiosity is your default again. And when that becomes your baseline, suffering isn't banished. It's softened, transformed, held. You stop fearing the shadows. You sit with them, listen, learn, and they, in turn, reveal their gifts. The real miracle is how normal it starts. To feel how unremarkable peace becomes. Not because it's boring, but because it's natural. Joy isn't a spike anymore. It's a current. And even when chaos arrives, and it will, you no longer drown. You float. You don't brace. You breathe. And in doing so, you teach the field how to meet you. Not with resistance, but with rhythm. And now, in this space, right here, right now, something ancient in you exhales. Because it's not a new truth you've found. It's an old knowing. You've remembered. You were never lost, never behind, never broken. You are always becoming. And the stillness, the fog, the ache, they weren't mistakes. They were signals, invitations, thresholds. You crossed them. Now you carry a new frequency, not one you read about, but one you bled for, wept for, waited for. And it's yours, stable, whole, undeniable. You won't need to declare it. Your life will. Your choices will. Your eyes will dot, and perhaps the most surprising thing of all, the world will begin to mirror it without effort. Not instantly, not loudly, but surely, gently, like a tide meeting the shore, not because it was summoned, but because it was always coming. You are no longer who you were, and yet you are more yourself than ever. And from this place, the real journey begins, not towards something, but from something, from coherence, from clarity, from truth. By the time most of the world finally notices your transformation, it won't be because you announced it. It'll be because you stopped arguing with who you were never meant to be. That's the strange thing about coherence. It doesn't arrive with applause or accolades. It arrives with a soft exhale, a quiet room, a moment where you realize you didn't need to fight for what you now feel internally anchored in. It was never about fixing yourself into worthiness. It was about remembering that worth was never the question, only the frequency you used to broadcast in its absence. Now the air around you feels different, even when no one else has changed. The room receives you differently, not because the room has evolved, but because your nervous system no longer screams for permission to exist. And here, in this gentle stillness that follows all the storms, something remarkable begins to unfold. Reality stops responding to your old identity. It no longer echoes back the chaos, the craving, the questions. Instead, it becomes a softer mirror, one that reflects your internal clarity before it reflects your actions. You don't have to hustle it into shape. It reshapes itself around your steadiness. But that's when the real initiation begins, because this part, this frequency maintenance, is the part no one talks about. They talk about the leap, the shift, the awakening. But what happens after you land in the new world? When no one else knows what you've shed? When the invitations to revert still arrive, wrapped in old comforts and familiar tones? That's when coherence becomes a devotion, not a performance. Not something you show, something you keep warm inside your chest like a sacred flame. This is when you realize that awakening wasn't an event. It was a return. And the more you stay here, the more the world begins to reorganize itself in quiet, often invisible ways. Not as magic, as physics, as vibrational resonance responding to a stabilized pattern. And yet, even then, there will be shadows. You'll revisit old wounds, not because you're broken, but because now you can hold them without collapsing. They'll rise like fog and dissolve under your gaze, not because they were illusions, but because you are no longer entangled in their timeline. This is healing by frequency, not force, and the world doesn't always understand that. You'll walk through spaces where urgency is currency, where trauma is identity, where stillness is mistaken for apathy, and you'll hold your field anyway, not to prove anything, simply because it's who you are now. And even as you hold that field, you'll still feel the pull sometimes, the temptation to explain yourself, to rush to reassure, to shrink just enough to stay digestible. But the more you honor your own signal, the less you'll compromise it for comfort. And the more you trust that signal, the clearer it becomes. Not louder, just more precise, more consistent. And that consistency becomes your compass. You begin to feel when a decision deviates from your core, even if it makes sense on paper. You start to sense when a conversation, a commitment, a yes isn't fully aligned, not in judgment, but in vibration. And you no longer override those signals. You don't negotiate with your coherence. You listen, you pause, you choose differently. And that choice, subtle as it may seem, is what builds a new reality. Not all at once, but cell by cell, choice by choice, day by day. And the people around you begin to notice, even if they don't have the language for it. They say things like, "You seem different," or "I feel calm around you," or "Something about you feels clear." And you smile, not because you've become someone better, but because you've remembered who you've always been underneath. The static, and this remembering becomes a way of life. You no longer need to check your reflection to see who you are. You feel it in your spine, your breath, your silence. You don't perform confidence. You rest in it. You don't chase belonging. You become the place where others feel safe enough to find their own signal. And in a world so addicted to noise, that stillness is revolutionary. It ripples, quietly, unseen, but undeniable. And sometimes it's lonely. Not because you're unloved, but because you've stopped tolerating the kind of connection that required distortion to maintain. And while that can feel like emptiness at first, it's actually the spaciousness you need to attract resonance. Real resonance. The kind that doesn't ask you to shrink or stretch to fit. The kind that recognizes your signal because it sings the same song. And you will meet others like this. Not always in crowds, often in quiet corners, in eye contact that lingers, in conversations that go deeper than expected, in people who don't flinch when you pause to breathe before responding. These aren't soulmates. They're signal mates, reflections, reminders, and their presence will help you hold the line when old patterns try to reassert themselves, which they will. Not because you failed, but because you're human. Evolution isn't a ladder. It's a spiral. And each turn brings you back to the same places. Only now, you meet them from a higher frequency. And that frequency makes all the difference. You no longer react from wounds. You respond from wisdom. You no longer protect your truth. You embody it. And embodiment doesn't need translation. It doesn't argue or justify. It simply resonates, and the field adjusts. The universe is not testing you. It is calibrating with you. It is constantly responding to the most consistent signal you emit, not your declarations, not your affirmations, not your vision boards, but your embodied coherence. That's the real transmission. And over time, the effort fades. The vigilance softens. The loop closes. Not because you've stopped growing, but because you've stabilized enough to stop bracing for collapse. Your baseline becomes ease. Not because everything is perfect, but because your nervous system no longer requires chaos to feel alive. And that's the miracle no one sees. That's the work that can't be captured in content or quantified in charts. The miracle is in the mornings when you wake without dread, in the moments when silence feels like home, in the pauses between sentences where your body doesn't clench, in the choices that feel like integrity, even if no one notices. That's the real frequency shift, and it's the kind that endures. The kind that builds a life not of reactions, but of resonance. And as you live that life, something even stranger begins to happen. You start to forget what it felt like to force, to beg, to hustle. It's not that you lose empathy for those still in it. It's that you stop identifying with it. You can still hold space for pain without vibrating inside it. You can still witness suffering without collapsing into it. You become the space, the presence, the ground. Not because you've transcended, but because you've integrated. You've made room for every part of you to exist without shame. And that wholeness is what the field responds to, always has, always will. And in that wholeness, you remember what no teacher, book, or ritual can teach you, that your being is enough, that your frequency was never broken, only buried. And now, it sings again, quietly, consistently, like the deep hum of a tuning fork finally settled into the key of who you've always been. And that hum changes everything, not because the world becomes easier, but because you become clearer. And clarity is a kind of power that doesn't dominate. It invites. It magnetizes. It rearranges reality without coercion. Not through pressure, through presence. And presence, once truly embodied, is the most potent force in the quantum field. Eventually, there comes a moment, not sudden, not theatrical, but quiet, where you stop seeking confirmation that you've changed, because the evidence lives in how you move through the smallest moments of your day. You still rise to the same sun, still drink the same tea, still tie your shoes the same way. But somehow your presence is different inside each gesture. The breath is deeper. The pause before reacting is softer. The silence you used to rush to fill now feels like companionship. No one announces this moment. There's no graduation robe or ringing bell. Just a small smile as you realize you've gone hours without explaining yourself to anyone, even in your own mind. You've stopped rehearsing conversations that never happen. Stopped making space for things that don't return the energy. Stopped pretending confusion when clarity is already in your body. This is not arrogance. It's alignment. And it's fragile only at first, like new skin learning the texture of the world. But the longer you stay here, the more durable it becomes. And that durability is what holds you when the noise returns. Because it will. Life is not a flat line. It's a pulse. Stillness doesn't mean nothing happens. It means you no longer distort. Your signal just to feel something. Even joy changes form. It's less of a spike, more of a warm undercurrent. A quiet shimmer through your chest when the wind moves just right. A sense of gratitude for no specific reason. A tear you don't wipe away too quickly. You no longer demand that every moment proves itself, because your resonance has become its own reward. And that changes everything. You stop making fear a creative advisor. You stop asking doubt for directions. You stop negotiating with shame before taking up space. It's not that those voices disappear. They just stop being authorities. They become background noise in a much larger song. And you, at last, are singing the lead. There's a beauty in how ordinary your life starts to feel again, not as a return to mediocrity, but as a soft miracle. You walk the same streets, answer the same emails, do the same chores, but none of it feels like sacrifice. Every act becomes an extension of coherence. You brush your teeth and feel grateful for sensation. You cook a meal and sense how your presence infuses flavor. You clean your space and recognize that you're also tending to your frequency. Nothing needs to be profound anymore to feel sacred. That's the gift of integration. The mundane becomes a medium for transmission. And reality, once unpredictable, once jagged, begins to respond with a strange kindness. Not because you control it, but because you no longer fight its feedback. You see everything now as an invitation. Even the disruptions. Even the delays. Even the people who don't understand you anymore. Especially them. They become gentle teachers, showing you where you're still tempted to edit yourself, still tempted to grip the edge of the old narrative. And when you notice those places, you don't criticize. You breathe. You bless. You recalibrate. Not as a task, as a rhythm, as the way you now live. People ask, how did you get here? Expecting a story of struggle, of hustle, of perfect steps. But the truth is subtler. You stopped forcing yourself to become someone else and started softening into who you already are beneath the noise. You didn't manifest it by chasing. You became it by releasing, by remembering, by relaxing into the signal that had been whispering all along. You aligned by subtraction, not adding more rituals, more pressure, more perfection, but by dissolving everything that wasn't your truth. And your life, the real one, not the performative one, emerged through that unraveling like a garden blooming after you stop, micromanaging the weather. And the people who now show up, they feel different too. They don't want your mask. They want your resonance. They don't ask you to make sense. They feel your coherence and rest in it like a warm fire on a cold day. There's no need to explain anymore. They already know. And the ones who don't, you don't chase. You wish them peace and keep walking, not out of spite, out of frequency discipline. You've come too far to negotiate your vibration, just to feel temporarily included. And the real surprise? You don't miss the old chaos. Not in the way you thought you would. You thought it defined you. The adrenaline, the striving, the dramatics of almost arriving. But now that you're here, in the quiet pulse of the real, you see that it was never you. It was noise wrapped around the wound of believing you had to earn existence. And now that you've stopped paying that debt, you feel something deeper, a soft joy that requires nothing, a still aliveness that does not depend on outcome, a quiet trust that cannot be bought or borrowed. This is the new frequency. And it's not an achievement. It's a homecoming, not a finish line, a foundation. And from here, you will still be tested, not by the universe, but by old patterns knocking gently to see if you'll answer. A familiar temptation, an old lover in, a new disguise, a moment where you could bend just a little and no one would notice, but you would. And that's enough now. You feel it. The integrity in your bones, the quiet click of alignment when you choose what truly honors your field. That's the power. That's the medicine. That's the moment that shapes the next one. Not because it's big, but because it's real. And real, these days, is everything. And so the days unfold. Not without challenge, but without collapse. Not without friction, but with deeper grace. You no longer need to avoid the storm. You walk through it dry because your field is no longer porous. Your energy doesn't leak. Your boundaries don't scream. they hum. And the more you live like this, as this, the more the world seems to listen differently, not in awe, in recognition, as if it remembers something in you that you've only just remembered yourself, that you are not here to chase a destiny. You are the signal that destiny responds to. And now the question changes. No longer, how do I make this happen? But instead, how do I keep tuning to the version of me where it already is? That shift, that question, opens doors. You begin to walk through life as if it's already welcoming you, because your frequency has gone ahead to prepare this space. And all you must do now is meet yourself there, again and again, with the consistency of someone who no longer doubts their transmission. You don't need to push the river. You are the tide, and the current is memory, not of the past, but of your original wholeness. And now, every moment is a return to that signal, a remembering not of who you must become, but of who you've always been. Underneath every layer of forgetting dot, there is a rhythm you begin to notice once you've lived long enough inside coherence. It doesn't arrive like a drumbeat or a song. It arrives like breath, like the unforced rise and fall of something older than time, something your body has always known, but your mind kept interrupting. Now that rhythm leads, quietly. It decides when you speak and when you stay silent, when you move forward and when you rest. It tells you, without noise, who belongs in your field and who only visits when you dim. It whispers which decisions carry weight and which ones only feel urgent because they echo old wounds. And you, instead of arguing or analyzing, simply listen. You've learned that the most powerful response isn't always cleverness or charisma. It's calibration, matching your internal environment to the external invitation. And if they don't align, not stepping into the room just to be polite. This is not isolation, it's integrity. And that integrity has become your compass, not just in moments of peace, but especially in chaos. The world still swirls around you. Deadlines, emotions, unfinished stories. But you've stopped spinning with it, not because you've disengaged, but because you've remembered your center. And that memory now lives in your breath, your bones, your gaze. People feel it before they hear it. They may not know what changed, only that your presence feels different. Like you're not trying to convince them anymore. Not trying to prove anything. You simply are. And that isness radiates more truth than all your old words ever could. In the stillness that follows the storm, you begin to understand that you are never meant to live life through adrenaline. That being constantly on edge was not enlightenment. It was hypervigilance with a spiritual costume. Now you rest, not just at night, but in your relationships, in your thoughts, in your goals. Rest becomes your starting point, not your reward, and that rest reshapes everything. You stop measuring your day by how much you achieved. You start measuring it by how often you return to yourself, not as an escape, but as a homecoming. And your nervous system, once a battlefield, becomes a sanctuary. Your body, once braced against the world, becomes a conduit for life to move through, without distortion, without delay. This is embodiment, not a concept, a lived frequency. And that frequency doesn't need an audience. In fact, it thrives in the unnoticed moments. When you fold the laundry and feel gratitude for texture. When you make tea and pause just long, enough to smell the steam. When someone speaks in pain and you don't try to fix them, only hold their signal with yours. That's the resonance the world is starving for. Not solutions, but presence. Not noise, but tone. And tone, once stabilized, changes more than opinion ever could. You don't need to change minds anymore. You hold frequency, and the minds that are ready soften on their own. You don't need to dismantle systems with arguments. You live the alternative so clearly that the system starts to seem irrelevant. And while the old world may still knock with its demands, its distractions, its drama, you've stopped answering every call, not out of apathy, out of discernment. You no longer outsource your signal to urgency. You no longer assume that someone else's emergency requires your immediate attention. Your no has become loving. Your yes has become sacred. And your maybe later has become a declaration of trust in timing, in unfolding, in the intelligence of resonance. Even the future feels different now. You used to chase it. Now you listen for it. You let it speak to you in dreams, in impulses, in subtle tugs behind your ribs. And you follow, not blindly, but faithfully. Because the version of you who lives in that future is not a stranger anymore. You've become her. You've stopped sending her postcards and started answering her calls. That's the real manifestation. Not receiving something you want, but remembering someone you are. And when that version of you becomes your baseline, reality no longer feels like a negotiation. It becomes a dance, an improvisation with the quantum field where every step is both response and creation. There's no more pretending, no more waiting for the right moment. You realize that the right moment is every moment you bring your full frequency to. Not forcefully, fully, wholly, consistently. And from this place, miracles become mundane. Not because they're less magical, but because you no longer doubt they belong to you. Synchronicities no longer surprise you. They comfort you. They confirm that you are precisely where your signal belongs. That life is not random. That energy is not wasted. That the version of reality you inhabit now is not the reward for getting it right. It's the reflection of your resonance, moment by moment, breath by breath. And even in uncertainty, which still visits, you remain stable. Because now you know that uncertainty is not danger. It's possibility. It's the space where the quantum field arranges itself around the most stable signal in the room. And when that signal is yours, you stop panicking when things take time. You stop crumbling when people misunderstand you. You stop shrinking when the outcome isn't clear. You expand. You breathe. You stay. And staying in your frequency, in your clarity, in your truth, becomes your revolution. Because so few people ever truly stay. Most waver, shift, dilute. But you've come to see your presence as a tuning fork. And the longer you hold the note, the more everything around you comes into resonance. Not overnight, not all at once, but undeniably. This is how reality rearranges, not through pushing, but through pattern. Not through panic, but through precision. And your pattern is clean now. Not perfect, not unshakable, but true. And truth, once lived this deeply, doesn't require proof. It carries its own gravity. It bends time. It opens doors. It heals what used to fracture you. And from this place, you finally understand what was meant by your energy introduces you. Before you speak. Because it does. And it speaks more clearly than any biography, any resume, any declaration ever could. It speaks in silence, in stillness, in the soft hum of someone who no longer fears being fully seen because they've already seen themselves. And they did not flinch. That's the coherence the world longs for. And you carry it now, not as a brand, but as a breath. Not as a performance, but as a pulse. And the world, in its own time, will follow. And so you sit here now, not at the end, but at the beginning of something you no longer need to chase. The signal you've been tuning to isn't out there. It's in you. You've become the stillness that recalibrates chaos, the clarity that doesn't need to be loud to be heard. There's nothing to force anymore, nothing to fix. Just breath, just presence. Just the quiet knowing that life is no longer something to survive. It's something to harmonize with. And the more you return to this space, the more the field rearranges to meet you here, not as a reward, but as a reflection. So take one more breath. Notice how different it feels now. And when you wake tomorrow, or next week, or next year, remember this frequency. It's yours. It always has been. Subscribe to our channel so we can meet again next time, because other stories are already whispering your name, waiting for your presence to invite them in.